everyone, Kate here with yet another Victober video. I actually thought I was all done filming, but this topic, it came, fell into my lap, and I thought this is a very interesting story and I want to tell you all about it and share it with you. I'm going to be doing an author spotlight on a Victorian author that I have never read myself. And her name is Annie S. Swan. And she wrote very much kind of moral stories of faith in the Victorian era. So kind of Louisa May Alcott, Charlotte Mary Young sort of category. Since I have not read her, I can't tell you how didactic they are. I don't know. And it's interesting because within Charlotte Mary Young's work, there is a real range. And then also another similar author, although she was American, is Louisa May Alcott. And I think Little Women is just beautiful. And all of the lessons in that feel very organic. Whereas Little Men and Jo's Boys, it doesn't feel that way. The lessons feel very contrived and didactic. So I haven't actually read her, but she sounds so intriguing, and she has some very easily accessible and affordable Kindle books. And so her name is Annie S. Swan, and she lived from 1859 to 1943. So I will have at the end, I will tell you all the books that I could find on Kindle that were written during the Victorian era. And she was Scottish. So that is something you don't find as many Scottish Victorian era authors. And she was one of 7 siblings, and they lived on Mount Skip Farm in Gorebridge. She had a remote childhood, but she was close with her family. And another reason why maybe she didn't know as many people in their neighborhood is that every day she and her siblings took the train to Edinburgh, and they went to school there. It was the dame school, and so she didn't have as much interactions with neighborhood children. Then tragically, when she was 20, her brother came home from a trip with typhoid fever, and by the time he was convalescing, her mother then came down with it and died from typhoid fever. She was very close with her mother, and the family was never the same after that. A couple of years later, her father remarried, and none of his 7 children got along with the stepmother. Years later, when he was on his deathbed too, he spoke about his first wife and not his second wife. And Annie Swan apparently in her autobiography said how happy she was that on his deathbed he spoke of his first wife and not this stepmother that none of the children got along with. I think she was kind of overbearing. That's what it sounds like. So at the age of 24, she was very motivated to get out of the house, and she married a school teacher, James Burnett Smith. And so they were married for the rest of her life. So her first novel, Ups and Downs, was published with Charing Cross Publishing, and it did get some favorable reviews. Charing Cross Publishing was a little bit sketchy in that I think she had to pay £50 to publish the novel, and then after that, she received nothing. She didn't get a dime or a pound, a shilling off this book. But it did have some favorable reviews. Then, though, in 1883, she published her most well-known novel, which is called Alderside, a romance of Scottish borders. Now, it was hard to find kind of reviews and opinions on this. There are no reviews of it on Goodreads, and it is written a lot in Scottish dialect. So I do think to the average person who isn't familiar with Scottish dialect, it would be a little bit dense to get through. But it got some really positive reviews. Lord Alfred Tennyson loved it, and he sent a letter of praise. Then the current Prime Minister Gladstone, was quoted in a newspaper saying it was beautiful as a work of art for its truly living sketches of Scottish character. And she remained in touch with Gladstone and received admission into the House of Commons on many an occasion. So that's later in her life. Like I said, I just found her life very interesting, and I hope you do as well. So something that I felt a little bit bad for her. Her writing, she was modeling after Margaret Oliphant, who was Queen Victoria's favorite author. She was also a Scottish author, and so her books, Hester, and then she has the Carlingford Chronicles, and she also has a number of ghost stories. I mean, she wrote many, many novels aside from the ones that I have mentioned. And so she was modeling after her. She really admired Margaret Oliphant, and Margaret Oliphant could not stand her writing. She said, what did she say? Yes, so Alderside, she attacked the work and said it was a stereotypical and unrealistic portrait of Scotland. So just imagine you're putting this book out there and you're hoping that your favorite author might notice it. Well, not only did she notice it, she hated it. And so I felt bad for her. She made 50 pounds from Alderside, but it made some good connections for her. So she might not have grown terribly wealthy from it, but she did get to know a lot of people from it. Interestingly, she is referenced in D.H. Lawrence's book, Sons and Lovers. She becomes she's the favorite author of one of the main characters. And she published over 30 books, some poetry, and some of the books were novels, and then some were books of advice on politics, religion, just any pertinent topics. And she also had a very successful career with publishing serial fiction and writing as an agony aunt. So people send in letters saying, here's this dilemma I have. Can you please give me your advice? People's Friend was a famous magazine based in Dundee, and I think it's still published today. Actually, when I was trying to find kind of facsimile editions, it looks like People's Friend is still published, which is really fun to me that it's still around. And so she wrote for People's Friend from 1869 and until her death in 1942. And then the final serial that she was writing for them was left unfinished. So the people who ran People's World asked for subscribers to write in what they thought the possible conclusions to the story would be, which I think is a very fun thing to do to kind of give some camaraderie when they're all kind of very sad that this author has passed away. So it says, I have a quote here that says, "The power of the serial medium in Annie's story writing is perhaps best understood through a letter written into the publication from an avid reader. The reader reminisced on how she would visit her gran in a working class Scottish tenement block, when one evening there was a loud banging upon her door. Her granny opened it to find her neighbor from across the hall in a dreadful state. 'Terrible news! Jeannie's broken off the engagement!' she wailed. Granny sat her down at the kitchen table and pressed her hands tightly. 'Calm yourself, hen. It's only a story.' So she was so bereft over this serial publication by Annie S. Swan that she had to go tell someone about it. And it says, Annie would often be criticized by her contemporaries for the happy ending, which would usually conclude most of her work. And it says that she was often criticized for the happy endings that she had, people thought it was unrealistic and kind of saccharine. But what I love that she said, Annie was quick to assert that she was content that her work would act as an escape and release from the often difficult and drudging lives of her readership. The world is so full of a number of things, many of them sad, that it does not want its burden added to by the woes of a lot of imaginary people. That's a philosophy I can really get behind. I feel like there is enough pain in real life that sometimes you think, why am I adding to this by having such a bleak book that I'm reading? Now, I don't mind reading sad books as long as there is an element of hope in them. But if they're just completely nihilistic and despairing, I won't enjoy them. And then also she was passionate about social and current affairs, and she mixed these into her fiction. She also wrote a series of short stories in the British Weekly under a male pseudonym. And the Glasgow Literary Society was so fascinated by thinking of who the author was, and they reported that they thought it was written by a wartime journalist or a member of the armed forces. So she was an avid reader of war correspondences, and she studied maps closely. Whenever she was going to write about a certain area, she would go very in-depth studying maps from that area. And then eventually she was sent to France, and she would speak at night to the troops, speaking of the gratitude, encouragement of the women at home. So she was really there as a morale booster. It began, that role that she had, it began to evolve, and she would write in the weekly magazine, the Agony Aunt letters. And she would just speak to soldiers of their mothers and sisters and wives. She would take down what they said, and then she would bring it back to their family members and speak with them face to face when she returned home, and gave them kind of some hope in the midst to hear from these family members that were away and that they had been missing. Then on the 7th of January, 1918, her war role took an unexpected turn, and there was extreme food shortages in the UK. And so she went to America to speak on behalf of the UK, asking for assistance with the food shortages. It was a mission for food. That was how it was described. And so she went right to Capitol Hill, and she spoke with Herbert Hoover and his entourage at the government buildings. And then she got booked to speak at the food administrations in many states throughout the country. And Annie was adored everywhere that she went. State administrators, thanked her for her impact in inspiring the labor forces, preventing strikes, and relating to them the importance of the labor force in the war effort in Europe and beyond. And then she got into politics. She founded first in 1928 the Scottish National Party and then the Scottish Party in 1932, and was also part of the temperance movement, and she was also a suffragette. So, what an interesting woman. Then in 1910, tragedy struck their family. So she had two children, Edward and Effie. And Edward was 15 years old when he was packing up to go return to rugby college at Eton. And he was packing a rifle up. He was putting it in with his golf clubs. And he didn't realize that it was loaded, and he was shot, and he died within a half hour. So how tragic is that? Such a preventable death, and he was only 15. So she was devastated. Her husband was devastated. Her husband and son were extremely close, and her daughter as well. That was her only sibling. Her daughter Effie, though she did do some good work, she worked with the Red Cross in France and Belgium as a motivational speaker. So taking up kind of her mother's mantle. And then it did say she didn't have a terribly happy marriage. She said that in her autobiography, which I wonder how hard that is to get a hold of. She and her husband both had very strong personalities, and they could really butt heads. She did live as a widow for the last 10 years of her life, and she was very close with her daughter, and she wrote until the very end. She always enjoyed writing. Lastly, about her books, she said, "I do not feel any particular thrill of pride when I gaze upon them on the shelves. They have served their purpose, and as none of them is likely to prove immortal, their number is a matter of no importance." So I do wonder, was she having kind of some second thoughts about all the happy endings she had made? Did she kind of have imposter syndrome? I'm not sure, but it is a really sad comment to make kind of about this body of work that you have spent your life making, to feel that way about it. So some of her books are really hard to get a hold of, like Alderside. I don't think there is an ebook, and there are none of her books on Project Gutenberg. However, a few years ago, a Christian publishing house did publish a number of her novels and novellas, and those are like 99 cents on Kindle. Those are really easy to access. So I will speak briefly about each of those that I found. So the first is A Vexed Inheritance. This is from 1890. Lady Adelaide Westray leads the perfect life until it is turned upside down and she has only her faith to sustain her. So I'm paraphrasing. Their descriptions were a little bit longer. Wyndham's Daughter is from 1898. Joyce Wyndham is the daughter of wealth and privilege, but her heart yearns for a life of purpose and meaning. She isn't content with a life of genteel tea parties and stately balls. After attending a political meeting with a friend, her mind is awakened to a cause she can embrace. And that sounds really intriguing to me, and I'm pretty sure that is the ebook that I bought. I went ahead and got Annie, I just forgot her name. What is Annie Swan. I was going to say it's Swiss, but no, Annie Swan. So I did get that because I thought, you know what? I want to see if I will like her. I'm hoping they're sweet stories that I can enjoy, and they won't feel kind of overly sweet. Okay, then the next one is Warner's Chase. This was published in 1900, so it's just on the line. When Squire Warren dies, suddenly his wife and children find themselves destitute and at the mercy of an uncle who is a stranger to them. They must leave their beloved home and live in London. So a little bit of Sense and Sensibility kind of vibes going there. And then the last full-length novel that's easily accessible is A Divided House. This was published in 1889. Richard Blake and Frances Kendall fall in love at first sight, and she accepts his proposal within days of their meeting. But it doesn't take long before they realize their different ideals and must make some hard decisions. So those are all the easily accessible novels. Then there are 3 novellas. These are all just around 100 pages. Roger Marcham's Ward, published in 1892. Bachelor Roger Marcham has his best friend's orphan daughter come to live with him, but he thinks it's going to be a child, but it is a beautiful young woman. So I think you can kind of guess what will happen with the plot there. And then A Bachelor in Search of a Wife. What a specific title. 1892. Richard Heath is given a fortune on the condition that he marry within a year. He must choose between 3 women. And then lastly, Mistaken. Written in 1889. Margaret works at the neighborhood mission and must balance her home life with this. So those are 3 little novellas. So I don't know if I am going to come to love Annie S. Swan's writing, but I am definitely going to try and see what I think. And I hope that maybe there will be some other readers who enjoy kind of the domestic realism, cozy fiction that might enjoy her books. And let me know if somebody out there has happened to read her. And I will be back with another video soon. Bye.